Hello and welcome to The Cozy Life. My name is Alex, and as you can see, I'm still in my dressing room. The Cozy Life has been grounded this year, but I didn't want this channel to die, so I thought I would explore some of my other cozy interests, and a big one of those is reading. I have been very much enjoying BookTube at the minute and finding my favourite creators, and I just thought I'd join in. I've got a lot to say. I've got a lot of books and I've got a lot to say about them. Is there a cozier pastime than reading a book in a chair and forgetting about all the horrors of the world? No, there's not. I just thought I would do a little reading roundup for this video in the name of keeping this channel alive, and hopefully meaning that I can diversify more into books as well, because I do really enjoy reading, and hopefully I have something to offer in that department as well. In terms of reading tastes, I'm very much contemporary literary fiction, a little bit of horror, a little bit thriller. I don't mind the occasional romance or the occasional classic or things like that. My main areas are contemporary literary fiction and a bit of horror. I have read 10 books this month, 10 or 11 books this month. It's been a good reading month for me, actually. I'm not normally one of these people that can plough through books and read hundreds of books a year. I have a lot of free time and I still don't know where people get all that free time from. So I do give half stars, and I hate half stars. So before I properly got into the internet side of reading books, I was just reading books and reviewing them on my own in the back of my journal, and I was giving them a score out of 10 and no half marks, because I feel like if you're going to score something 4.5 out of 5, then you're really marking out of 10. So just mark out of 10, you know what I mean? I feel like the 0.5 feels indecisive, non-committal, and I don't like that. However, it seems as though it's the way it is done in book reviewing is out of 5 stars. So therefore, I'm going to condense my 10 stars down to 5, and therefore we will get half marks, which annoy me, but I want to translate the way I review into a context that is widely used. I also kind of want to talk about the way that I review. So I don't tend to get caught up too much in the plot. I don't want to share too much about the plot because I'm the kind of person that doesn't even really like reading the blurb on the back of the book, because it means you go into the book with some kind of expectation, and I like to have no expectations at all. I just want to be immersed in the story instead of thinking in the back of my mind, oh, well, when is that bit that the blurb said it was going to happen? You know what I mean? I just want to be immersed. So I try not to go too much into the plot, because I think any discussion on the plot is a spoiler for me. I like to talk more about execution, more about style, and I also just believe that any story is a good story if it is told the right way. You could write me a book about brushing your teeth, and if you wrote it the right way, I would still enjoy it. So I'm not necessarily someone that chases a story that I'm interested in, because any story could be interesting to me. Which is why I try and read across all genres as well. I am trying to get a little bit better at that. If it's a story, it's interesting, in my opinion. So I think that is all of the sort of boring housekeeping to one side. Let's talk about some books. Carol by Patricia Highsmith. Ultimately, it is a lesbian love story between an older woman and a younger woman in the 50s. Obviously, not a lot of gay rights or liberation at that time. It was very controversial. Carol is married with a child, and Therese is a young single girl. I think she's 19 and Carol's 30, 33, 34. As you can see, this is the film version of the book, and I don't normally like to buy these. Does anybody like to buy these? I don't know anyone that actually likes these, but I just saw this in a used bookshop and I'd not long watched the film, so I thought I'd pick it up and ignore the cover. It's quite interestingly told in that I feel like quite a lot of contemporary fiction doesn't do, where it trusts the reader. Sometimes a chapter will start in the middle of something happening. So there's a bit where Therese takes something to a pawn shop, and the chapter starts with she was in the pawn shop and he was looking over it, and you're like, he's looking over what? But the narrative eventually comes to a head and explains everything. Highsmith trusts in us in a reader that we will have the patience to wait for it to explain itself, rather than just be like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to put this down because you've seen it now. There is a lot of other examples of that, but that's just like the simplest one that I could think of off the top of my head. And so I do think that is quite unusual. I do really like the descriptions of New York at the time. I'm really sorry, I'm trying to get better at not looking in the monitor. So between looking at the monitor and looking at this, am I ever going to look at you? Who could say? The descriptions of New York are very evocative of the time and the place and sort of the culture of, you know, going to lunch and going to drinks and having a cigarette and having a coffee. And I really felt transported into the place. Very, very evocative writing there. I also really liked Therese as a character. She was very, very understated and underspoken, quite frustrating in a lot of ways. She was a woman of few words, and she had all of this introspection and all of these worries and all of these fears, but she never really said anything to the people around her. And one of the most popular sentences in the novel is "no said Therese" or "Therese said no," and I love that. Just no, and no explanation for why she says no. And I feel like as a woman in the world, maybe even more then than now, you feel like you have to give a reason for saying no. You can't just be like, no, because I don't feel like it. And I really, really liked that about Therese. So even though she is quite a mild and reserved protagonist, especially when she's talking to other characters, she is very powerful, and I did really like her. So I did give this 3.5 stars out of 5 stars. Very much enjoyed that and would probably like to pick up some more Patricia Highsmith. The next book that I read was an audiobook, and it was Happy Place by Emily Henry. And I'm not always a fluffy romance girly. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I just feel like some romances are below my reading age. I don't know how to say that in a non-offensive way, but that is just how it is to me. I don't think that they don't have their place. I don't think they're not enjoyable, but I actually find it hard to enjoy them. I think the problem with romances as well is because you kind of always already know where the story is going, it always has to be about execution, and if the execution is mediocre or worse, it's boring. That is not true about Emily Henry. I do quite like Emily Henry's writing, and she was the first romance writer that I came across that I found was a little bit more elevated. Book Lovers was the first book that I read by her, and I really loved that, and that's what made me try Happy Place as well. Unfortunately, I did only give Happy Place 2 stars. And let me tell you why. The book had a very promising beginning. Henry is a very, very good writer, and she's very, very funny. And I always say that I'm a cheap laugh in real life, but when it comes to media, films, TV, books, I'm a hard laugh. And Emily Henry makes humour easy. It's very rare that I find myself laughing out loud at a book, and I've laughed out loud at both of her books that I've read. I felt like Happy Place just went on a little bit too long. I was listening to it on an audiobook, and during the last 3 hours I was just like, yes, 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 I know. We're like, you know, in the last act, and I have to go and hear about characters going for coffee, and it's not really like adding anything to the narrative or the conclusion. I just wanted it to be wrapped up. I did really like all the characters in the book, and I felt like the characterization was done very well, and I find that in other contemporary romance novels that I've read, characterization is a huge issue. Characters often come across as very, very melodramatic and often do things outside of what they're characterised as being like. And I do think that a trope of Emily Henry novels is that characters fall in love by trauma dumping on each other, and it doesn't seem to be anything else. I don't think that was as over in Happy Place, but there are other ways to fall in love, guys. You don't just have to talk about how terrible your life was before you met each other. By the end of the novel, I was just a little bit tired by these long, emotional, either external or internal monologues by the characters. I was just like, come on, wrap it up, get together. Let's end this book now. So unfortunately Happy Place did get 2 stars, but it hasn't put me off picking up some more Henry. I think in terms of light and fluffy, that's probably the lightest and fluffiest that I can go. And I did really enjoy Book Lovers, and it definitely has its place in my repertoire of things I want to read. I think I gave Book Lovers 4 stars. Another audiobook was Yellowface by R F Kuang, which is a satirical thriller, and it was huge a couple of years ago, wasn't it? Really, really loved her writing. Already can't wait to dive into her other books. I did really want to try Catabasis. I don't know how you say it next, but I do think that is actually another satire that's been mismarketed, so I don't know if I'm ready for that, but I do want to pick up Babel. The writing quality was just top tier. Number 1, she made the most dreadful, horrifying, repulsive type of person as a narrator interesting to read, but she also made like quite dull just being on the internet all the time, using social media a lot, checking social media posts and stuff that we do all day long in our lives anyway, so why would you want to read about it? She managed to tell all of that in a way that kept it enjoyable and interesting, and I think that's a very special skill to have, to be able to make all of that, like this really, really horrible person and this really boring topic interesting. And I just don't feel like you get a lot of good satire these days. I did think that the ongoing allegory tired out a little bit for me towards the end. I was like, the point has been made about racial bias in and out of publishing, in society, in publishing. The point has been made about the horrible meat grinder of the publishing world as well, and how disingenuous it all is. Before the end of the book, once those points are made, they're made. It's like, we get that you're commenting on it and trying to undermine it in a funny, enjoyable way, but how much more of this horrible person do I have to read about? But overall, the story was very, very well written, and dare I say, propulsive. I feel like that's such a back of a book word, isn't it? Propulsive, and a very, very good read. And I did give Yellowface 4 stars. So this was, I started it on in an audiobook and then picked it up at the library, so I don't have the copy here to show you, but this is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. I gave this 3 stars. So I really, really loved How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix. I feel like it had a really, really crazy plot, but it worked, and you were like, oh my god, now this is happening. And it was very much like up and down, twisty turny, but it kept the pace up, and it was just so enrapturing. I really, really loved How to Sell a Haunted House, and it was in my top 6 books of 2024. And I've been trying to chase that hit with Grady Hendrix ever since. So I tried Final Girl Support Group, and now I've read Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. And I do think Witchcraft for Wayward Girls is very atmospheric and very much sets the scene of this like gothic, hot, sweaty environment. I don't think the same level of pace that we had in How to Sell a Haunted House was required for Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. I do obviously think that the novel is intended as this slow burn, much like this long hot summer that we're in. The biggest problem for me, I think, was the ending. I felt like Hendrix was actually unable to commit to an ending. The story almost ended all of the ways that it could have, but therefore ended no ways, in my opinion. I think it's set in the 70s, and it's about this teenage girl that gets pregnant, and she gets sent to a home for wayward girls to have her baby, and the baby then gets adopted by a family, and she just goes back to her normal life at school, and nobody ever has to know that she was pregnant over the summer holidays. I feel like Fern, the protagonist, she's quite consistent in who she is throughout the book, and I know that teenagers are changeable, but towards the end her resolve is just constantly changing, and I just don't think that that's what she was like as a character at the start of the book. And I get that she was going through some crazy stuff, and how anyone would process all of the stuff that was happening at the end of the book would be difficult, but I just don't think that the way that it was executed lined up with that. So the way that her mind was changing a lot about who she was didn't really line up. One minute she'd made this decision, and then one minute she'd made another decision, then another decision. It just got a little bit like, okay, so how is this going to end? Because she's changed her mind so much in this last act, I just don't know who she is anymore. Overall, very atmospheric, and I enjoyed the idea, and I actually just wished the witches had been a little bit more scary. They were all bark and no bite, and I just wish that there'd been a bit more bite from the witches as well. On top of that, I'm just not very sure of Hendrix's femme-sploitation genre. He writes all of these female-focused books about female issues, even something as uniquely female as being pregnant and giving birth. I just feel like he's dining out on the female experience a little bit too much for my liking, whilst not being a female, and that just makes me feel uncomfortable. So I don't know if I'm going to pick up anything by him in the future, because I'm just a little bit wary. While we're on our feminist rant, let's talk about Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, which I also read as an audiobook. I am not by any means an experienced fantasy reader. I've read The Hobbit, I've read The Magician by Raymond D. Feist, and that's it. So maybe fantasy just isn't the genre for me. I gave Assassin's Apprentice 2.5 stars. And the reason is, it was entertaining and it was enjoyable enough. Number one, it's a fantasy, and I'm the annoying kind of feminist that doesn't want to hear anything about men. We're living in a fantasy world, and Robin Hobb is a woman. We're living in a fantasy world that this woman has written, and I'm still hearing male-focused narratives about men. And it's just like, I can hear about men running the world if I pick up a newspaper or, you know, open any history book. I just want a fantasy written by a woman to be about women. And I don't know if that's a little bit of an extremist view. If I'm living in a fantasy world, my fantasy world is not run by men, unfortunately. So if you're a man and you're watching, I'm sure you're not anymore. So the book was definitely entertaining and enjoyable enough. It's just a story. It's a lovely story, but it was just a little bit like, I remember there was, just in the UK, there was a TV show about Tracy Beaker, which is a Jacqueline Wilson character. And this one episode really sticks in my head for some reason. And it's an episode where a published author, it might have even been Jacqueline Wilson doing a cameo, but I can't remember. But a published author comes in to talk to Tracy Beaker about writing because I think she wants to become a writer. And the author tells her the best way to write a story is, Jimmy was walking down the street to go to the shop. Unfortunately, his shoelaces were untied and he tripped over, but fortunately he managed to catch himself on a tree. But unfortunately, the tree's bark was really sharp and he scratched his hand. But fortunately, when he got to the shop, the plasters were buy one, get one free, etc. is how this author told Tracy Beaker to write a story. And I very much feel like that's all that was happening in Assassin's Apprentice. Was the main character was going along and it'd be like, this bad things happened, but now this good things happened, but now this bad things happened, but now this good things happened. And I was like, but where are we actually going? Like, what is the actual story? Is just all these good and bad things happening to this person that I didn't really care about, you know. If he died at the end, obviously you know that he doesn't because there's more books, but if he died at the end, I would have been like, I wasn't invested in him as a person. I didn't think that he was particularly special. And maybe if I was more invested in him as a character, I would have cared about all of this, fortunately, unfortunately, but I just really wasn't that bothered. At the end, suddenly the pace ramped up to 100, a million. And suddenly all of this stuff was happening. And when I'd finished listening to the book, I still wasn't sure who'd got who, you know? And I was just like, how have we been meandering along, learning about this and doing that, and then this and then that. And then at the end, it's just like, bam, 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 bam. I just wasn't particularly taken with it. And maybe, I don't know if that's just what fantasy is like, if that's how fantasy is written, where it's very much, then this happened and that happened and but I just wanted something really like dimensional, and I wanted it to have all of these layers and all of these narratives and a magic system and just loads of stuff to like really get into, and it just didn't really happen. A friend and the internet has recommended me Priory of the Orange Tree as something that seems to be scratching the itch that I'm complaining about here. So I'm going to try Priory of the Orange Tree. She is hefty. She's like 700, 800 pages. I might get it from the library and give that a go. And then if that also doesn't scratch my itch, I might just write myself off as not a fantasy girly, and therefore I have no right to comment and be giving things 2.5 stars because I clearly just don't F with fantasy, you know? So I'm willing to accept that I could be wrong, but I'm probably not. Then we've got the only DNF for this month, which was As You Wish by Leesa Cross-Smith. And this is about 3 American au pairs who move to Korea. So they don't know each other before they get there, and they move in with these families, and that's as far as I got, because the writing was just giving a little bit YA, even though it's not a YA book. I think I got to chapter 2 and I just sacked it in. I was like, life's too short to be bored out of your mind. That's all I can comment on that one. Quite simplistic writing and a lot of telling rather than showing. Then we have my first 5-star of the year, which I also got from the library, so I don't have it to show you, although I did nearly buy it in the bookshop the other day. And I probably will go back for it because it is definitely something I want on my shelves because I very much enjoyed it. And that was Dark Matter by Michelle Paver, not sure how you say it. Although I just criticised As You Wish for being overly simplistic, I do also think that Dark Matter was very simplistic in the way that it was written, but it was simplistic writing used to such a great effect. I think the book was 200 pages, but it's quite big writing as well, so you can just bam through it. Like, I would have read it in a day, but I just got too scared. It's about some guys in the 20s. I want to say the 20s that go on an Arctic expedition and shit goes down is all I'm going to say about it. She does this amazing job of conjuring the majesty of the Arctic and the vastness, and then also the absolute desolation and loneliness and remoteness and the cold and the dark and the oppressiveness. It's just put together so well. It's also written as diaries from the main character. Sorry, I also probably should have said that they were going to experience the full dark, so when the sun never rises, so it's just dark all the way through for a few months. To build this beautiful but terrifying remote Arctic world, and then it was just also horrifying and so tense, and I was literally reading the pages like dreading turning each page because I was like, oh my god, what is going to happen? Just filled with trepidation and dread, but also awe most of the time that I was reading this. Just a very concise, well put together, easy banger. I don't know if all the copies say it, but my copy said on the front it was a ghost story, and it's just like, you know, going into it's a ghost story just from the cover, never mind the synopsis. And it just fulfills the assignment. Just perfect execution, simple but well done. Private Rites by Julia Armfield, of course, another 5-star banger. How could it not be? This is a very, very special piece of writing. Very character driven rather than plot driven. Is there much of a plot to speak of? Who could say? It's about 3 sisters living in, should we say, a post-apocalyptic world or like post-climate disaster world, where everything's flooded and their father has just died, and I don't think that's a spoiler because it's literally the first thing the book tells you, and it's just about them navigating their family life around that. Their relationships are quite complicated anyway, as I'm sure they are with any family, and it's just a lovely exploration of that. Such beautiful use of language. So the language is really poetic and evocative and layered, but without being overwrought or over literary, and I think it is on the cusp of that, but it isn't. Every sentence has its point. Every sentence tells you new information. There's a reason it's there. It's delivering something, but it is also beautiful. Yeah, the 3 protagonists, I think you start off thinking that they're these 3 dreadful, horrible people, but I think only in the way that everybody's dreadful and horrible, and I think as those layers are built up about them throughout the book, I do realise at the end that actually you really love all 3 of them. It's only when you're confronted with what happens at the end of the book do you realise how much you've fallen in love with these 3 characters that you started off being like about, if that makes sense. And then there's just this weird simmering unknown tension throughout the book as well, which is also just portrayed very well. People could find themselves unsatisfied by the ending, but I do think that it was the correct choice to end the book the way that it was, without too much more exposition, without trying to spoil or tell you anything that you don't want to already know. A very special piece of writing, very relatable, very realistic, and lots of depth and layers, and definitely would benefit from a second and third reread, and it should absolutely be on a curriculum somewhere, at least at a university. Next book is The Shining Girls by Lauren and Beukes. I read Bridge by Lauren Beukes earlier in the year and very much enjoyed that. I actually picked up The Shining Girls first. I found this in a used bookshop in Vancouver when I was in Vancouver last year, and then I ended up reading Bridge first because I liked the sound of Bridge more, but then I read this and actually enjoyed this a little bit more than Bridge. Just a really fantastic like story, you know. There is a lot of, so it's about a time traveling serial killer, and there is a lot of different narratives and a lot of different times. It's better to try not get too bogged down in trying to keep track of the chronological narrative. I think you should just let the story tell its story, if that makes sense. Obviously be aware of the times and dates at the start of each chapter, but I would say try not to deep it because I think that would potentially then ruin it for you. And just reading some of the reviews on Storygraph, which is how I log my reading, it's like an independent book rating app, shall we say. What was I saying? So yeah, try not to get bogged down with the chronological narrative too much if you can. I know that it's tempting to want to sort everything out, but it's better if you don't even try. So really loved our protagonist Kirby. She's just so feisty, fiery and funny, and a very well put together layered character. There's also Dan, who's her partner, not like romantic partner, work partner. And he's great too. There was a weird dynamic between the two of them, I would say, but I did still quite like him and his character and how they worked together, and I felt like it had its place. And then obviously Harper, the serial killer, is the personification of evil. He's just like, you know, your textbook psychopath that likes torturing, killing, maiming and gets off on it. Really enjoyed it, really liked Beukes' writing overall. It always flows very well. It's very readable, if that makes sense, without feeling overly simplistic. She does an amazing job of building tension and suspense throughout, and each of the victims of, again, I don't know if this is a spoiler or not, but each of the victims of Harper, even though they tend to only get 1 or 2 chapters to themselves, they're all such well-rounded, fleshed out women, and I just love women written by women. Like, we know how to write ourselves. I was a little bit disappointed by the end. I get why open-ended endings exist, or like not over-explained endings exist, but I just feel like, just tell us, man. Just tell us. Like, you've told us everything else, just tell us. And then the conclusion of what was going on was, to me, like a little bit dodge, but you have to, I feel like sometimes you have this amazing idea and then you have to consolidate it somehow, and sometimes consolidating it isn't the dream that you'd hoped for, but you just have to find a consolidation to tell your story. I get that, and I think that's what's happened here a little bit, but I still very much enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars. And then the final book of this month was Sky Daddy, which I will put here because I listened to the audiobook. Well, this was by Kate Folk, and this is about a woman who has a sexual fetish for dying in a plane crash. It is a pretty wild ride. There's lots of unexpected moments and things that happen, and you're just like, this is not where I thought this story was going, but I'm here for it. Folk manages to handle quite a dark, terrifying topic with alarming lightness. And the main character, she's just so lovable despite her weirdness, and I do think that Folk has written her as a neuro spicy queen. I do think there is a little bit of autism there, not to be diagnosing people even if they are fictional, but I really like that she portrayed her that way without having to say, I'm autistic. Not that there's anything wrong with that either, but I really liked that it was very well shown rather than told in that instance. I think, and because autism is very different for every person that it shows up in, I really liked that she allowed us to experience that, if that's what she was trying to do, rather than just say, you know, I was diagnosed as autistic when I was 10 or whatever. I also really found it interesting that the book was very much about like friendship and found family, and our protagonist Linda managed to just to create all these really lovely connections through the book as well, some not so lovely, against this just very bizarre backdrop. Again, when you think about the male equivalent, so if you think about J.G. Ballard and his fetishization of car crashes, and when that's done with a man, it just feels really dark and scary. But the way that this was done, and I don't know if it's necessarily just a gender binary issue, just quite an interesting contrast how the story is told from a feminine perspective rather than a masculine perspective, a similar sort of vibe anyway, and how much sort of like lighter and more lovable the character was. It did kind of feel a bit weird how nice everyone in the book was. I just feel like people just aren't that nice in real life, especially when someone's a bit odd. But that's fine. We're living in the world of the novel. We're not living in a real world. And then the ending, I think that, again, it's another one where I think I would have liked a little bit more consolidation of everything that we've just been talking about in this book, rather than the way that it did actually end. But that's fine. Sometimes the writer's got to do what they've got to do. So I gave Sky Daddy 3.5 stars out of 5 stars. I have no voice left. I have talked all afternoon about books, which has been very lovely. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed my foray into trying something new. Thank you so much for watching, and if this kind of content is something that you're interested in, please do consider subscribing, because I'm hoping to incorporate monthly reading wrap-ups from now on on my channel. So please do consider subscribing if reading wrap-ups are something that you're interested in. But thank you for watching, and please do take care.